One of the tricks to this is where the original wires are, they were attached in a sequence, and you have to detach in that same sequence without burning a bunch of the insulation. And the other trick is that if I get in here and grab this wire and heat up that joint, the wire inside this will get hot, hotter than you realize, faster than you realize, and then you will make a big indentation or impression or bare spot even in the insulation. So you got to work fast, you got to work cautiously, and you got to try to avoid applying too much pressure in any one spot on the jacket. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some fresh solder to the old solder. That will let me get that old stuff flowing better. And I'm going to use this plastic round tip to try to pull this out. And sometimes you guess wrong as to which one was attached first. Alright, there's one. And while it didn't look lovely to do, you can see there's a little bit of birds nesting right there, where the wire strands have come a little bit separate. We can address that later. But that jacket was not damaged, so we'll be able to do a neat job rebuilding this. I have not shown in this video because I discharged it previously, but this, people get on to me for not putting this in every video. Always discharge amps and capacitors before working on them. You don't want to get zapped, but I have already done so. Just a matter of course. Looks like this black one is next. That's a choke connection. And sometimes you get in there and tug it with your fingers. And this process just repeats for all of them. Okay, for this little ground wire, it's bent around and wrapped. I'm going to try to undo the wrap a little bit so I can reuse it. It's a little tough to do. This old solder doesn't want to flow, even though I've added a little bit more to it. Let's add a little bit more. Try to make sure I don't touch any of the other wires around it. It has some really stiff wire they use there. Alright, let me stop there, because I don't want the insulation to melt in a chain reaction. And this is a level of care that an old amp like a 63 AC30 or an old Harry Joyce wired high watt deserves whenever it's feasible. They just really had that in there jammed. Oh, and then after all that, it broke off at the other end. Well, it is, in fact, a 60-plus-year-old. It's a fairly old piece of wire, and it is just a piece of 20-gauge bus wire with that insulation. So I can probably reuse that since the new one's going to be a little bit closer, or I can replace it. But I tried. Sometimes that's all you can do. And while I'm over here, I'm going to disconnect the leads for this cap as well, and for this cap as well, which means, and this resistor will get disconnected temporarily at least. Temporarily at least. Harder to say than I anticipated. Well, there's all that removed. Let's see if I can get this old excess solder removed with this sometimes recalcitrant solder pump. Well, that worked fairly well. However, it also revealed that this had never had a very good solder joint on it at all. Notice how this one's all shiny? That means it's been tinned. This one here had never really had a good solder joint. It was never really tinned. And these lugs aren't the best to begin with. When I change this cap out, I'll remove this hardware I want to make sure that we have a very good metal-to-metal contact at this point of the chassis. At which point I'll have this out and I can tin this because I can superheat this up really well. When it's attached to the chassis, it's harder to really heat it. Let me move you over to show you the next thing I need to disconnect. All right, this is the other end of that cap. The resistor was connected here, but this cap lead goes through here to this eyelet, which then has this wire going over here to this wire, which is for the connections for all the cathodes on the output tubes. We'll get to that. First, I need to disconnect this blue wire at this end so I can unwrap this lead. I'll rebuild it with some bus wire since the new cap won't allow that. But there's just something that they did in manufacture. Let's see if this will just come out or if there's any gotchas to it. A lot of things can be hidden by a solder joint. And again, it's just solid core wire with a jacket, but that jacket wants to melt when it gets hot. So in this situation, you gotta be careful. If you apply too much force, the phenolic will crack. So you gotta separate it a little bit. And each one's a little bit unique. You just gotta learn to recognize what you're seeing and how the forces are wanting to work. All right, so this lead comes through here, then gets wrapped around here. I need to undo that. Let me get some of that excess solder out of there so I can see what's going on. I use a bit of braid to get the stuff down in between. All right, so that was what was wrapped. Let me get this to focus better for us. I will bridge these two terminals with a little bit of bus wire so the new cap and resistor won't be part of the construction. Makes sense when you're building, but it's not great from a service point of view. All right, so next I need to turn my attention to all these resistors on the screen grids and the grids of these EL84s. And that takes nerves of steel. So I think I'm gonna have some lunch because I keep thinking that I'm hungry and I don't want any distractions, and just kind of get rid of any surgeon shakes before I go in there. It's tricky to do neatly and right, and the amp deserves it. So let's do what the amp deserves. Okay, I've gotten all the resistors very carefully removed, making sure especially that I did not damage the relatively fragile pins on all the tube sockets. So I'm going to go in with a combination of desoldering pump and some braid and get the excess off pins 2 and 9 of each no-volt output tube socket, and the excess solder from these two, which are the screen connections, and these two, which are the grid connections. Actually, these three are the screen connections. And with that excess solder removed, then I can make some stable mechanical connections. And then I will do the screen resistors first, trying to reuse the old insulation tubes that they put on there. They're brown for the screens and red for the grids. So this is too long for me to show step by step, and I've shown big chunks of this in other videos. So the main thing is just to be very careful, very methodical. If you run into an issue, stop, put down your tools, think about it. Better to take a little bit longer and be careful and meticulous than to get frustrated and then you break a pin off a tube socket or anything. That requires a lot of work to rebuild. Okay, done with that part. And in a standard AC30 repair for a JMI, unless something has gone really, really wrong with the amp, this is the part that takes the longest. It's the most meticulous. So I've got some 3-watt metal film, really high quality Vissches for the screen grids. This one has 100 ohms per the JMI spec. It will be harder on tubes, though the owner of this amp will be using it with a Variac, which will help. I've got 1.5K carbon comps for the actual grids. I was able to transfer the original installation for all of these, but this one screen connection, the original installation on that one was just too far gone. Sometimes rubber corrodes, plastic corrodes, and there's just nothing you can do about that. So I've got this brown Teflon on there, which is a close enough match, especially for something that no one will ever see after this video. But, you know, I tried. So it's time to rebuild all the filter cap stuff over here and the bias stuff, at which point this wire gets reconnected. In this amp, I'm going to leave it in stock JMI heater grounding initially to show you that problem. Then I will solve that problem. So there'll be some further changes over here, and I am going to be installing an HT fuse in this amp, so the wiring won't be exactly stock in this area, but it will save this power transformer from a lot of failure modes, as will the heater balance change I'll be making later, which will prevent a dead short from nuking this very old, valuable power transformer. So, you know, you got to choose what's important in a vintage amp. Do you want to have vintage faults or vintage transformers still working 60 years later? I'm going to go on the side of the iron myself. All right, all that makes me much happier. Some things are slightly different places due to different lengths on the leads on this capacitor. For instance, it attaches here rather than here, so I put a bridge in there. I'm going to put a little dab of silicone in there just to bear the mass of that. Don't think I need to do that on this one. This one's pretty low mass, and the leads on this are very sturdy. And I've got the 50 ohm resistor, a good space from it for heat. I've got to reconnect this wire. I forgot to do that. And everything else is pretty much as it was. I went in here and cleaned and tinned all these components, and I got an awful lot of dirt out of those old contacts. Should be pretty much perfect going forward. Let me attach this blue wire, and then we'll move on to stuff in the preamp. Okay, going into the main part of the amp, you can see a non-original part there, non-original resistor there. Hopefully the tag board hasn't been messed up. One's been changed out there, it looks pretty good. Those two are going to get changed out for a ceramic disc, which does affect the sound. That'll get changed out while I'm in there. But the majority of what I'm going to do, at least first, is just focus on the electrolytics. So this is going to get changed out, and I hate changing this one out, so that's going to get changed out a little bit later. I'm going to start with that one, and that one, which are the 3 electrolytic cathode bypass caps in the amp. And as you can see, it had a really bad power switch installed, non-original, so it's getting a switchcraft in there. So let me do all that and we'll report back. Alright, much better. So I got the 3 electrolytics I mentioned. Got the main electrolytic here. And in this area, I changed out, of course, the electrolytic. This resistor, it's a 220K, and I'll show you why. The old one that they had in here, which was not original to the amp, but it was period correct. It was very old carbon comp, 220K, actually measured 870K, so would not have been a very nice sounding channel. I've got in the correct class 2 ceramic here, and that 47K was a carbon film. It's now a carbon comp. There are a lot of places in an amp where it makes no difference. That tail resistor in an AC30, I actually can hear a difference. It's not just that. I mean, it's cumulative, but it's worth getting right for a 63. Now, if that one old 220K measured 470K, 870K rather, who knows what the rest of these measure. So I'm going to go through and do a measurement on them and see if any of them really seem to be way out to lunch, and take care of those, and then we'll put the new power switch in place, and at that point it should be safe to power on and listen to, and that'll be cool. Okay, new switchcraft Carling switch installed, and the fuse is all wired up. I've timped in the power cable. This is the power cable to go out with it. It's a hospital grade, but that's not the real installation. I've got to connect something to the speaker stuff and put into some tubes, and we'll power this up. Now this amp came with a set of old tubes that have not been tested. I'm first going to test the amp with the tubes, some newer tubes that I know are good. So if there's any problem, I'll know it is not the tubes. I went through the most common or the most crucial resistors in the amp. The one that's really out to lunch here is not too much. This plate resistor in the phase inverter, it's about 40% high. That may be a sign of it's bad, or it may just give the amp some cool character, so I'm not going to change it automatically. And we'll revisit things like that cap there. Anyway, let's get some tubes in there and get some speakers connected and see where we're at. Okay, this will be the first time to power the amp on, and hopefully the first time I'll have had a chance to hear this amp. It came in set for 245 volts. It's set to 115 right now. I've got a Variac giving it about 110 actually. And I need to get in here and check the bias and all that, but I'm also using it with a current limiter. And this little bit of the panel got a bit chewed up over the years. I might find a washer that'll fit that. Let's power it on and cross our fingers. It's all loaded up with new tubes. The light comes on. And I'm watching my current limiter, and I'm going to listen to hum. I'm going through my regular shop 8 ohm cab, though I do have a 16 ohm cab here with blues that I'll try this through later. I want to make sure it's working first. And I'm hearing something through the speakers. That's good. I'm not hearing a lot of noise. That's really good. So far, so great. Got some noise in the vibe trim, probably an old resistor. We'll get to that. All right, let me plug a guitar in and see what happens. All right, so. Now, for those of you who don't know, this is not the top boost channel. This is the non-top boosted brilliant channel. It sounds different to what you're expecting. That probably clipped the hell out of the lav mic, but it's a really good sign. So I'm gonna let this run for about 20-30 minutes. Nothing plugged in. Well, the guitar's plugged in, but the volume's off. Actually, I gotta unplug it. I'm gonna leave these two channel volumes up. I'm not gonna mess with this one. This one's noisy right now. We'll get to that. And I want to see if the behavior of the amp changes as it gets warm and things have voltage for the first time in many years, and see where we're at, just in case it starts to have problems. I know the bias is going to be in the ballpark. I've got the Variac at like 110, so I'm not too worried about it. It should be pretty in a good spot. The hum is almost non-existent. The amp is sounding great, so I may not do a lot of heroic stuff in this amp because I don't need to. I'll still be doing some things to protect the power transformer, as mentioned. But I want to make sure that the amp was overall healthy first.